All right, let's dive in. Today we're talking about something you've probably never put together, a common cholesterol pill and the fight against cancer. It's a pretty wild story about an old drug learning a surprising new trick. I mean, it just sounds a little bit like science fiction, doesn't it? Could one of the most common medications on the planet, something designed to protect your heart, also have the power to take on cancer? Well, that's the big question we're going to unpack. So where does this story even begin? It starts with a class of drugs that millions of us are familiar with, statins. You might know them by names like Lipitor, and they are, without a doubt, one of the most prescribed medications in the world. So what do? Well, their main job is to lower your bad cholesterol, your LDL, to keep your heart healthy. But I want you to pay close attention to that detail on the slide, lipophilic, which just means fat-soluble. Certain statins, like atorvastatin, have this property, and it lets them slip into the body cells really easily. Just tuck that little fact away. It's going to be a huge deal later on. For the longest time, the story of statins was super simple. They were developed in the 80s, got approved in the 90s, and by the 2000s, they were an absolute blockbuster. For decades, the conversation was 100% about heart health. Nobody was thinking they might have a secret second act. Then, as researchers started looking at the data from millions of people taking these drugs year after year, a strange pattern started to pop out. And it shifted the story from the heart doctor's office right into the world of cancer research. And this, right here, was the spark. It wasn't some planned experiment, but a really powerful observation from real-world data. It seemed that people taking statins for their cholesterol were, in some cases, doing better with cancer. That's a clue that's just way too big to ignore. And just like that single observation kicked off a whole new line of thinking. It was one of those classic, that's interesting moments in science that turns into a massive research effort. Suddenly, the race was on to figure out why this was happening. So how on earth could a cholesterol drug possibly mess with a cancer cell? Well, the answer is deep inside our own biology, in a kind of biochemical highway that statins just happen to put a roadblock on. So here's how it works. Statins block an enzyme that kicks off something called the mevalonate pathway. Now, that pathway's main job is making cholesterol, but it turns out it's also a critical supply chain for molecules that hungry cancer cells absolutely need to grow and spread. So by blocking this pathway, statins were, basically and accidentally, cutting off a key resource for tumors. You can think of it as this incredible two-for-one deal. On one side, you get what you expect, lower cholesterol, but on the other, you get this amazing unintended bonus effect. You're messing with the proteins that act like a gas pedal for cancer growth. Sometimes you're even nudging those cancer cells to self-destruct. It's just a remarkable biological coincidence. Okay, so the theory is solid, the science makes sense, but does it actually hold up when you look at real people? Well, over the last decade or so, the evidence has really started to stack up. Let's look at the data. Let's just start with this number, because it's pretty staggering. A 58% relative improvement in survival for some patients with triple-negative breast cancer. And if you know anything about cancer, you know that's a particularly aggressive and tough-to-treat form. This wasn't some tiny effect, it was a huge signal. And it wasn't just in one type of cancer either. When scientists did a meta-analysis, that's where they pulled data from lots of different studies to get the big picture, they found about a 26% lower risk of death across a whole range of advanced cancers. That suggests this effect could be really broad. And check this out. For blood cancers like chronic lymphocytic leukemia, patients on statins had a 61% lower risk of dying from their disease. I mean, when you see numbers like these, you start to understand why researchers are so excited about this. So with all this really promising data, what does it mean for a patient walking into a clinic today? How is this research actually being used right now? Okay, and this is a really crucial point. Statins are not an official FDA-approved cancer treatment. But because they're so well known and generally safe, some oncologists are prescribing them off-label, for a reason other than what they were approved for, as a way to support standard treatments. The hope is they can help weaken the cancer cells from the inside. Now, remember way back at the beginning when I told you to hang on to that fat-soluble detail? Well, here's the payoff. It turns out not all statins are created equal for this job. Those lipophilic or fat-soluble ones, they can get inside cancer cells easily to do their work. The other kind, the hydrophilic ones, have a much harder time getting in, which makes them way less effective for this purpose. It's a really critical difference. So where does all this leave us? Well, this very old, very common drug is writing a brand new story for itself, and we're really just in the middle of it. The final chapter isn't here yet. Now, let's be super clear. Nobody thinks statins are a magic bullet that's going to replace chemotherapy. But the real hope and why this matters so much is that they could become a powerful supporting actor, an affordable, easy-to-get tool that just helps the main treatments work even better by cutting off one of cancer's supply lines. And when you step back, this whole thing is just a fantastic reminder. Innovation doesn't always come from inventing something totally new. Sometimes the biggest breakthroughs happen when we find extraordinary new uses for the ordinary things we thought we already understood completely. And that kind of leaves you with a really fascinating question to think about, doesn't it? If a simple cholesterol pill had this kind of secret hiding inside it all along, what other potential game changers are just sitting right there in our medicine cabinets, waiting for us to ask the right questions?